appreciating prose, and we have seen the different categories of prose and how it started and the condition of England at that time, everything we knew. You have already gone through the lessons in social and cultural history of Britain. You have to study that in the first year, that is in the first and second semester. So you know a little bit about the early part of England. We know that the Angles and Saxons were the earlier inhabitants, or even before that you had the other people, and the fights that were going on, the Danish fight, everything was something that you have already learned. But going through all this, you have to know that prose had its own impact in literature. That came only much later. So the topic that we have to learn this day is evolution of prose, and also the contribution of early translations. Why translations? The reason is that the English people at that time, or the people in England at that time, were regarded as pagans and also people who were totally illiterate. You will find it quite difficult to believe that. But that was the case because the people from Europe, especially from France, invaded England and they gave their language to the people of England. And so you find that the learned people of England started learning more Latin and French than their own language, or the people who were access to literature. Most of them were very poor people and illiterate people, and I've told you about the impact of the printing press by Caxton and how it made available a lot of prints. Even before that, the people were invaded from all sides and even from the continent, and they were not given much chance to develop. Most of them were pagans, as I told you, because the term pagan is used as a corollary to Christianity, because all those people who were not Christians were regarded as pagans in those days in England. So you find that with the coming of the Angles, that is, the Angles were the masters of the land north of Humber, and the Jutes of the land of Kent, and the Saxons of all the remaining country south of Thames. So towards the end of 6th century, there was a mass conversion to Christianity. Earlier there was Christianity, but it was all destroyed, and the priests and the monks were in a poor condition. The monasteries were destroyed, but now there was a mass conversion at the end of the 6th century, and the writings appeared at the end of 7th century. 6th century there was conversion, and as a result of which you find most of the people converted to Christianity. The name that comes to the forefront at this time is that of King Alfred. He was the Anglo-Saxon king, and he was the pioneer of prose writers. Because we are going to learn more about prose writing, King Alfred and his prose writing is something that we have to learn. How did the King of England, who was not from the continent, learn to read and write Latin, or the language of the invaders? The reason is that the king, he was the king of Wessex, and he endeavored to uplift the people, and he re-established Christian discipline and culture. For this, he reinstated the monasteries, the priests, the monks, because he knew that they formed the source of education. And this king understood only the language of his people, but if he is to master a language, or if he is to ask his people to learn or to get education, then he also must be educated. So he brought in foreign monks and reformed education. And the king himself started learning before he started teaching. As I told you earlier, his prose is very important. So as a king, why is his prose important? Did he use his kingship to give more importance to his writing, or is it as a result of a gradual evolution? He surrounded himself with learned men and scholars. He learned Latin because he knew only the language of the Saxon, and he started translating the works of Latin into his language. The reason is that there was not much literature in his language. So when there was literature in Latin, written in Latin, we know that Latin was already a much progressive language, and there were lots of epics and writings in Latin, and these were brought in by the monks and also the invaders. And he started learning Latin, so this helped him to learn the literature of Latin. So when he went through it, he thought that it is good to translate it to his own language. So he set about translating. So these translations paved the way for the first prose writing. Most of these were not in prose but in poetry, but when he translated into prose, he was able to use his common sense and make it readable. There was not much confusion. It was smooth flowing, and you can read it through, because the earlier Saxons language was much improved on, and it became English. So from the point of view of the present English, when you read the earlier translations, you find only slight differences in the modern English, but you find a lot of flowing thoughts in those prose writings. So his contribution to English writing is something that he started regularizing the old elliptical abrupt style with its obscurity and lack of continuity, and this regularizing was an improvement on his earlier writing, or the Saxon writing. And this is why when we start reading the prose of King Alfred, we do not find it anything different from the present English, because it has a connection with the present English, and the abrupt style and the elliptical way of writing of the old masters was removed, and he was able to translate and write fluently. And so from translations he also started writing. So when he started writing, this in a way improved his knowledge and also his time, and this is why he is regarded as one of the innovators of English prose, or maybe the one person or the pioneer of English prose writing. Till then we had only poetry. As I told you in the introduction, poetry was the theme, or the poetry was the only genre that was accepted by the academicians, and even prose and not just even drama and tales or novels were written in poetry rather than prose. And so when King Alfred started writing and also started translating the works from Latin, you find that he was able to contribute his own style to this prose writing. This is why we regard him as a pioneer, because he did not adhere to the old norm of prose writing. He improved upon that, and this improvement was really helpful for the development of English language. And then you find that the chronicles, or as we call them, annals of the great king, the chronicles of Winchester, they were all things that he translated, and these chronicles were written in correct prose, so that when you write it, the language was an improved language. The style of prose also started improving. It was amplified and smooth. This is the word that Legwin and Casamin uses in order to examine the term or even the prose of the king. It was amplified and smooth. That is, these chronicles of Winchester were amplified and smoothed over when it was translated, and this in turn made it much nearer to the present English. So let's go over to the Anglo-Saxon literature. They were, as we all know, that they were the masters of Humber and the Jutes of the land of Kent and the Saxons of all the remaining country south of the Thames. So you find that these Angles and Saxons the Angles were all people from all these different places, and Angles and Saxons and Jutes were also people who had much majority in England. When you come over to Anglo-Saxon prose, you observe that the objective is not to instruct and inform, and it is not to move, and since it thus educates the understanding, it necessarily turns to the future. That is, sometimes prose is written or something is written in order to instruct people or even in order to make the people think or feel like the poem or even fiction. But the objective of prose is to instruct and inform. So they strictly adhered to that norm, and they did not use too many words or exaggeration in prose writing. So this prose writing had an impact on literature because of these differences. As I told you earlier, there was mass conversion, and the priests and the monks were brought in from the foreign countries, and these priests and monks really helped improve the writing of the people. These monasteries were the centers of learning, and the Bible was translated and it was handwritten, as I told you in the first class, and these manuscripts were heavy, and with the coming of the printing press you find much improvement. So these manuscripts were brought in by the monks, and when they came over to settle in England, they started creating more manuscripts and translating even Bible. Even Bible translation is also regarded as part of prose, and that prose is also something that contributed to the development of English prose. Since the people in England wanted to learn, as a result of the conversion, they really wanted to learn English or learn Bible. Bible from Latin was translated, and it was made to understand, so that the people can read that. The learned people read the Bible, and instead of narrating the stories from the Bible as such, they exaggerated it and made into a story form or stories or fiction form, and this in turn entertained the people. So in that manner also the conversion or Christianity had its impact on prose writing. Again, you find that the prose writings of the Anglo-Saxons, they observed the rules of ordinary speech, the speech of the ordinary people. Again, I told you in the first class, that is to remind that prose is much nearer to the language of the common people, and this is why prose became much more popular than any other genre of literature. This ordinary way of speaking really helped the people to read prose, and so they had much more access and also much more nearness to prose rather than to poetry. Poetry you can't read and understand, because even if I give you a poem and a prose, naturally you will wriggle in your seats, because poetry is totally beyond you. You feel that you can't understand poems, because that is the attitude of ordinary people. But when you are given simple prose writing, even the lines also, it reads like a story, so it is very easy to read and understand. This was the same attitude of the people even in those times, and so they had the feeling that prose is much their type of literature than poetry. Poetry is beyond their power, or so they thought. But drama they can understand. When the plays of Shakespeare was really appreciated, you find that comes much later. It was in the verse form. People had started developing, or people had started improving their skills and even learning, and so naturally they were able to appreciate Shakespeare or Shakespeare's plays, which you find it very difficult to read through and understand. But those people were able to understand that because they are so used to the verse form of drama. And it is in this connection that prose makes its entrance. So you find that the language, ordinary language of the people was much nearer to prose, and so prose was approachable to them. And then there is a continuity of thought as in the modern times. As in the what is a prose writing? Suppose somebody writes about a topic. That topic is like, for example, we had a prose lesson about cats, and it's a very famous essay. And you find that cats, why should I read an essay on cats? But once you start reading that essay, you get so involved in that essay, because in the essay, the writer says that cats are a different type of animals. And he starts enumerating the qualities of the cat, one after the other. That is, the first paragraph, second paragraph, after the first paragraph, then the second, he goes to the second, third and fourth and everything. And it is quite easy to understand also. And there is only one topic, and that is about cats. It's not jumbled type of wordings or even sentences. It's about cats. And you feel that you know much about cats, but you, after reading the essay, you come to the understanding that you don't know anything about cats. And the one sentence that I still remember about that particular essay is that cats do not become a domesticated animal, because they are the masters. They will accept you. You think that you have a pet cat and things that you go around saying. But understand that no cat will ever be a slave to the master. He or she is the master. That is something that I remember from that essay, because only then I understand the cats come and go. Isn't it true? Because you can't domesticate a cat like you domesticate a dog. You can buy a dog or a puppy and then train it and keep it there with you, and he will be there, your devoted slave, but not the cats. Sometimes the cats will come and accept food from you, but it is in such a manner as if though the cat is favoring you. So this is the manner in which I am telling you about this particular essay, because the manner in which the writer speaks about the cat continues for more than 3 pages. There is a certain train of thought in that. This is absolutely necessary for prose writing. As in the modern times, the Anglo-Saxon prose also had this continuity of thought as you find in the modern times. So we have learned about the importance of Anglo-Saxon prose and the features of Anglo-Saxon prose and the contribution of King Alfred to prose writing, and again about Anglo-Saxons and their literature. And you also find that the chronicles or the annals were written at a time like this, because it is a time to understand the fact that whatever that was happening during the lifetime of the king should be recorded and kept for the future generation to go through and understand. Sometimes certain incidents happen and it was recorded. There is a chronicler, means a person who is given the job of recording this in a manuscript and writing it down, and what should be written. The king will dictate and he will write. And these annals were written, and in a way these were kept as sacred books and kept for the future generation. So going through the chronicles, we can understand the fights that the king had been through, and the defeats and whatever things that he had contributed to. Maybe he had helped in the building up of an abbey, and maybe to set up an institution. All these were recorded in the chronicles. Along with that, you find the chronicles of the kings and also the stories as it goes by. Everything was recorded even at that time. And you find that this is something written down, and you have all these manuscripts, some of them or even traces of it and even copies of it in the museum, or it is kept somewhere. After this comes the we have in our Kerala similar chronicles or even stories in the form of ballads. In the form of ballads means a singer, a person will be there. He is much devoted to the king, and uh, he will be praising the king and the great victory he had won in the war. And this is sung from one place, so he goes from one place to the other, and he starts singing. Maybe he has got one instrument or some instrument or the other with him, and people will sit around him and listen to that. And it is a long narrative story point. This is how we call a ballad. We call it a ballad, but it is a strong, long narrative story point. In the same manner, we have a similar situation in Kerala, where you have a topic called something called the Vadakkan Paduru. And what are these? And what do you learn about it? It's all about a great king and the fight that he had, or a great ruler that he had, that the person had, and how he went forth to the war, and what happened during the war, and who tricked him. All these we know. And now we get it in printed manner. It was not in printed form earlier. It was sung by the itinerant singers. Itinerant means people going from people traveling or people going from place to place. Their duty is to sing the praise of the king, and they will add more and more stanza as they go along, and they will make the king appear to be a great person. And the people will start weeping or getting angry because he has got that kind of power to touch the mind of the people. And he does that through these story points. We call it a story point, but it was actually a chronicle, means a record of what the king did at that time, and especially a particular event which is that being sung around by that itinerant singer. In the same manner, in England, we also had such people going from place to place and speaking about the great victory that they had, the king had, and this is in the form of ballads. So all these were recorded as chronicles, and these chronicles were also translated or kept for greater references. Sometimes it is logged, and you find that this also forms a part of prose. And this prose writing, in a way, helped for the development of English, because you find in the history of English literature, you find there is a copy of the writings of King Alfred, and again a copy of the English. Means by that's English itself, but the modern English is after that. So when you compare it, you find only certain differences, only slight changes. Other than that, it reads very smoothly like the English that you have today. And this shows the development of English and also that of English prose during the time of King Alfred. And why the name King Alfred is given here? That is again a question that is remarked. Why not the names of other kings or even other rulers? The name of King Alfred is important because he did a lot for the development of education. Even at a time when you don't have a press, even at a time when people are too poor and people do not have any facility for education, he made it possible to have education. And he did not just order the people to have education, he himself taught the language that of the foreigners, and that is Latin. He brought in foreign monks and priests to his country because he knew that education is possible only through them, because they did not have proper teachers in England at that time. So these monks provided education, and when Christianity was brought in, along with them comes learning. And at that time, even pagan writings were also included in these translations, in these annals and chronicles. You find sometimes this pagan references, but it is again acceptable because you can't totally ignore the culture that you were born into, and totally accept the culture that was there, and that was there in the modern era. And so the old one also creeps into this writing. So writing started improving after King Alfred, And Anglo-Saxon chronicles or Anglo-Saxon literature produced writing which was more translation, but at the same time an improvement upon the older version, and in this way really helped us to better the prose of the times. But understand, this came only in the 7th century. The conversion took place in the 6th century, and after some conversion, people were taught the Bible, and by biblical stories were recited, and the Old Testament was read aloud to them, and the stories from the Old Testament was told to these people, and they were inspired by those stories. And for 1 century there was not much production of literature, but it is only in the 7th century that prose started developing in England. So in a way you find that there is the impact of the conversion, and that is the development of proper English or literature, and all the others were oral or orature or oral literature. Earlier existing form of literature was orature or oral literature, that is that which is spoken by the people, like the itinerant singers singing about the deeds of the king. And this is the manner in which it existed and went from generation to generation, and it was not written down at that time. The written literature came only in the 7th century, that is the English literature came only in the 7th century. So you have much to think about, and the features, as I have already told you, this is totally different from the elliptical style that was used earlier, and King Alfred's language was free-flowing and it had much resemblance to the modern English. So this is why the name of King Alfred and his contribution to prose is something to be regarded as very important in the study of prose writing. As I have told you about mass conversion, you find the importance of homilies, H-O-M-I-L-I-E-S, homilies. The dictionary will give you the meaning as a religious discourse which is intended primarily for spiritual edification rather than doctrinal instruction. You can call it a sermon also. Spiritual edification. Sundays you go for mass and the priest will have a homily, means a 5-minute speech on maybe the Bible reading that he had earlier, and maybe something that is connected to life. It gives you a spiritual strength for the whole week, and it is that which we call as homilies. And why is homily included in the evolution of prose? That's a question that we have to go through. Homilies are actually very short sermons. You can't just lengthen it. It must be apt, and it must inspire the people and strengthen their spiritual life. So words have to be used carefully, and the theme should be taken from the Bible itself and the New Testament most probably, and it is that, and maybe the Old Testament also, and it is that which is used as the basic for a homily. And you have to be an expert to restrain yourself to the 5-minute homily, and it should not be more than that. Because if it is more than that, it will be utterly boring for the congregation. But at the same time, it must be effective, and it must be spoken in an effective manner also. This is why homily is a part of prose writing. Homily is not in poetic form, it is prose writing. But at the same time, why do you think of homily as prose writing? Because you find very important people, or maybe people whom we consider as important, writing the homily and keeping it very strict, in a very strict form for each Sunday, and keeping it and maybe publishing it later on. These were written, and it is maybe it is kept for references later. So homilies also proved to be a step towards an improvement in prose literature. And there is a fact that you can't write 300 words only. It's definitely not the done thing. It means that it is more than 5 minutes duration. You can't finish it off reading in 5 minutes. So naturally, when you speak it out, it should be effective. Just 5 minutes or maximum 7 minutes. That is the duration of a homily usually. And this must be effective also. So words have to be used carefully. Theme also should be carefully selected for that particular Sunday. And then again it must be conveyed to the people in the most effective manner. This is why the theme or writing homily is an art. Not many priests will be able to write a homily and say that it is effective. Most of them are effective, but at the same time there are certain people, I can assure you, I can give you a lot of names, but even then it's not the right moment to give you the names, who will just read the Bible and then just 7 minutes of homily, 7 or maximum 5 minutes of homily. That's the maximum that will speak. But you listen eagerly for that, because those words are precious, and that will last you for one whole week. Spiritual strength that is given to you. So the priest who is preparing the homily should be extra careful in his writing and then even speaking it, and he can't just stop or stammer and do things like that. It must be done properly, and this is why homily becomes a part of prose literature. And this is why you have homilies of certain very important priests, and if you check the seminaries you will find them, and these are the things that really help the people or even the monasteries to improve themselves, and it is extremely good and effective prose. The next is Bible translations. Why is Bible translations important in the learning of prose literature, or why should it become part of prose literature? As you all know, Bible was not written in English. You find that it is English translation of Bible comes with the King James's version of English Bible, and even before that there was English translation of Bible, but even then the authentic version, or even the one that you use for references, for if you have a research, then it is King James's version. Even before that also we had English translation of Bible, but you find that the English translation came with the monasteries. They brought in Latin and the Bibles that were written, Bible that was written in Latin, and from Latin it was translated to English. And you know that translating Bible from any other language, you have to be careful with the wordings and also with the names. And it is not just the New Testament, they translated the Old Testament, the New Testament, and maybe the Acts of the Apostles came much later. So the Old Testament and the New Testament. Old Testament was much more important for them because it was the Old Testament that existed at that time. And so you find that the New Testament and the Acts of the Apostles came only much later. So when you have the 6th or the 7th century, you have the Old Testament of the Bible, and it was translated to English or the language, and the translation was done carefully. Most of them were stories, and it is these stories that were narrated to the people. And even the priests conveyed or even spoke about this, and you know that the English drama had its origin in the church festivals. The miracle and the morality plays, we have heard that, because when you learn about drama, naturally you have to go deep down to the miracle and the morality plays, mystery plays, all these. All these were set up in the church, and so you have to, the church people, that is the priest, should have a knowledge of the Bible, and they should convey that knowledge to the people in their language. This is where the translation becomes important. So this Bible was translated into English, and these stories were put up as stage shows for the people, and they really come to know about the Bible, and because of that these Bible translations were really important in the learning of proofs, because if you read the Bible you can understand that the sentences that are used there are not just the ordinary sentences, but even then it is more prosaic and it goes like that. And you know that those sentences are something that was there in the Latin version, and when you translate it into English, naturally that translation changes the nature of the story, not exactly the story, but even certain words, wordings and certain style also should be used. And it is in that connection that the Bible translations becomes really important to the learning of prose or the improvement of prose. And then you have the great work that is Motte de Ada. Le Motte Ada is the right name, and that is more about King Arthur. It is a long narrative story poem, and it is that which was translated into English, and it tells you about the birth and the life of King Arthur. Who is King Arthur? You are learning about him in your social and cultural history of England. But I would like to tell you about King Arthur because he is one of my favorite characters in British history, because he had a companion called Merlin the magician. And King Arthur was the one person who destroyed or who established a great kingdom, and he had a round table, and around the table he had certain knights, K-N-I-G-H-T-S, knights of the Templar, the knights of the round table, and each knight is given that place at the table because he had accomplished great deeds and had brought in glory to the king, not by killing a lot of people, but saving people in distress, maidens in distress, and saving a group of maybe a lot of people by killing the dragons. So they deserve a place at the round table since they have done good deeds and had brought in laurels to the king's name. So when this person comes, who are you? Then I am the knight of the round table. Then from King Arthur, then that means that people really are seeing the king in this particular night. So the round table and the knights of King Arthur are indeed famous in the sense that all ages, from the very beginning till even now, you have several versions of the stories of King Arthur and the great adventurous deeds of his knights, and the reason why they deserve to be a knight of the round table. Because you have to have done something great to get a seat at the round table. And this becomes the great book of story, and we know that stories or tales or fiction really becomes a part of prose, and King Arthur and his round table is something that round table of knights is something that we have to we get to know when we learn about English history. And this is done through the great adventurous stories of each knight. So the adventure of each knight forms several pages of adventure. It becomes a book itself. And likewise you have the adventures of all these knights, and also the birth and the adventure of King Arthur. He is not an ordinary man. He is someone who has got supernatural powers in the sense that he was able to take the sword from which was embedded on the stone, and he was held throughout his life by Merlin, who is also nicknamed as magician, Merlin the magician. He was there with the king, and he was able to foresee the future for the king and help him in the fight with the enemies. So Motte de Ada really tells you the story of King Arthur, and that is something that each and every child and each and every man in the country of England knows by heart, because it is their history, and it is on that England started coming up. And so the poem, Monte de Ada, Le Monte de Ada is the correct name. It was the French version, but even then it was written by Sir Thomas Malory, and he had written the book called Knights of the Round Table. And you find that there are the other knights called the Lancelot, his wife, and the King Arthur's wife Guinevere, and all these characters come here. It is a story, but at the same time it's a story which is written in correct prose, and the brave deeds are really imbibed by the people, and they really relish the stories of King Arthur. Not for one generation, but generations after that also, this was revived and improved on. So Monte de Ada, which is a very important work, it was also a poem written later by Tennyson. All these, for all generations, you find the brave deeds of King Arthur celebrated through either prose or poetry or even drama or whatever genre of literature. Literature just celebrates because his story has got a certain attraction for any generation, and because of that, Monte de Ada is really important. And then comes the Elizabethan prose and tracts, pamphlets and treatises. You find that these, that is, we come to Elizabethan times because you have a lot of people, the king one after the other coming on, and there was Christianity and it was Roman Catholicism earlier with King Alfred. But when you come to Elizabethan England, or even just before King Elizabeth's time, as you have learned in your history lesson, you find that there was a clash between the king and the church, and from there onwards it was Anglican Church. They have broken all their ties with the Roman Catholic Church, with the Pope, and so it was Anglican Church. And with the coming of Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, to the throne, he was the courage, or he was the one person which the people looked up in order to get inspiration. She was also called the Virgin Queen, and she was able to inspire a lot of men folk, and England was a nest of singing birds during her time. It was also a time for prose. Even though England was a nest of singing birds, means England had a lot of poets at that time, and sonneteers a lot, and Shakespeare himself wrote more than 100 sonnets. Likewise, a lot of other sonneteers were there even before Queen Elizabeth and during her time, and Shakespeare himself had written verses in his drama. All these were the form of poetry, and you find prose written by a certain group of people. Even though Elizabethan age is not famous for its prose, rather than more for its drama and poetry, you find Elizabethan prose also, and its features are something that we have to learn in the following days. Because when you take up Elizabethan times, you have to learn about the Elizabethan times and then go to Elizabethan prose, and only then it will be more effective. And you find that in spite of all the changes that are happening throughout the world, even though the world was going after poetry, prose was also there at that time. It was neglected in the sense that it was not given much importance at that time. But since we are appreciating prose, we have to know what type of prose that existed in those earlier times, and which are the categories that are there. And as I told you there, you have to have a coherent thought from the very beginning till the end, a connection of ideas from the very beginning till the end, and only then it will be effective to the people. So essays, short stories, everything comes under the title prose, and this is why you have to learn the different types of prose and also the history of prose. We are going through that history, and you have also something called a secular prose. Secular prose in the sense that, as I told you earlier, the priests were brought in, the monks were brought in from the other countries, and they contributed their own version to the development of prose. And as you all know, when the monks started writing, they'll be writing only about religious things and about things that are connected to the Bible. But other than the monks, there were a lot of people who started writing prose, and their prose had nothing to do with the Bible, and they freely expressed their thoughts through their writings. Even though they were not famous at that time, it was read by a few people and it is connected to certain groups in one way or the other. It had its own impact in prose, in the movement of prose. We'll see you again in the next class. Thank you.